And here we go for another episode of the Suppress Herald. And it is February 28th, and we've been off for a little bit last couple weeks as we just kind of accumulate some things to talk about. The reality is, I can do a whole episode every day. This newspaper, they call it, comes out, and it's getting more and more obvious that we are talking about a propaganda sheet, and there's no more, you know, people doing actual journalism in Maine. It's just a paper that prints what they want you to see and hides what they don't want you to see. That's really becoming obvious. I'm going to remind you that the all of the newspapers virtually in the whole state of Maine were purchased by the Maine Trust for Local News, which is a subsidiary of the National Trust for Local News, which is owned by several billionaires through their, Alex Soros and the Open Society Foundations, and Pierre Omidyar with Democracy Fund, and Bill Gates with the Gates Family Foundation. Those are three of the primary funders, and there's some others that are just as egregious as far as, the Heartland Fund, and we can go on. But basically, these are billionaires that are taking over newspapers across the country. Another piece of news that came out just recently was that George Soros is basically buying up the debt of a distressed chain, the second largest chain of radio stations across the United States, something like 220 radio stations. And again, they're looking at going into bankruptcy. So he's going out and buying up all their debt so that he can take control of all of our radio stations. So if this doesn't cause alarm to the American people that these billionaires, you already have Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, and I have cited that the Suppress Herald here locally routinely has Washington Post articles put into their local newspaper. So you know, it's really becoming a situation where we should be concerned that virtually all of the news is being controlled by a handful of billionaires. And, you know, the National Trust for Local News is a perfect example of that. As you dive into things, I want to share that, I started this podcast because while I was taking care of my mother in law here, living with my wife and I, she had to get that paper because she wanted to see what was going on locally, and, routine. She was used to that. It's the only reason I would have ever had paid for a subscription, and started to review things. And then 2 years ago now, I just celebrated the 2 year anniversary when I started reviewing the editorial pages of this paper every day, mostly on a weekly basis, and determining, okay, it's conservative letters to the editor, it's liberal letters to the editor, it's neutral, just general stuff, people saying thanks for this or that. And it has been extremely consistent. It's over 5 to 1. Liberal letters to the editor get published over conservative letters to the editor. And then the rest, it's about 50%, a little better than 50% is liberal. About 10%, actually, it's less than 10%, is conservative. And then you have the rest is, the other 35% or so is neutral. So we just finished 2 years. It's very consistent. You're looking at one or two maximum conservative letters. We're talking about a week, over 6 days that they publish the newspaper. One or two in a week versus 5 times that in every single paper. And, you can just go through and see it. And, the things that are bubbling up right now, it's pretty much pro abortion 5 to 1. It's pro gun legislation, take guns away, 5-1. It's bash Trump, absolutely five, more like 10-1, where you have virtually every day they print a letter in the editorial pages of the Suppress Herald here that's bashing Trump. And once every 2 weeks, maybe one time in 2 weeks, you'll let a letter slip through that says things about, well, wait a minute, Trump isn't so bad. So that just gives you an idea. This is just a propaganda sheet and part of a bigger plan, really. And we should be aware of it. I really want to start out today with, if you're talking about propaganda, a newspaper that prints editorials that praise itself, you know, I mean, that is about as telling is whoever is, the no doubt it's a millennial that's the editorial page editor and picking these letters. And it's really kind of specious that they would pick letters that were like this. In praise of support of local journalism. My heartfelt thanks to the Portland Press Herald Maine Sunday Telegram for doing what they do. And that is providing us with the local news. And then they talk about some specific articles. How wonderful. The Suppress Herald, and how wonderful they are. Then you have another one, grateful for varied opinions Saturday. And trees, oceanside housing, Donald Trump, the Constitution, local health care, downtown architecture. What do these things have in common? They shared space on the Portland Press Herald. Oh, yeah. Feel a little more hopeful about our endangered everything. And as a daughter of a newspaper editor, I especially honor the importance of shared thoughtful opinions in trying times. It's unbelievable. They print these as letters to the editor. Oh, you're so wonderful, except, and the reality is, I don't think most people, when they just read through, they aren't doing what I've done. And I can tell you, when I raised this with the editorial page editor with a letter to the editor saying that I looked at it and they are completely slanted and actually had specific numbers, her response was, "Oh, nobody's ever done that before." No, of course not. So, and then I think the real one that takes the cake is a letter from the publisher, a letter from the chief propagandist, Lisa DeSisto. She came from the Boston Herald, right there. No, the Boston Globe. She was a editorial, whatever there, and tells you everything. So, celebrating a remarkable 6 months at the Maine Trust for Local News. New ownership and a new business model have given us a fresh outlook on our future. Yeah, George Soros and company have funded the paper because it was losing, because half the people would never pick up and buy this paper because they know it's just a one-sided propaganda sheet. And so as a result of that, they have to be subsidized. So now this the National Trust for Local News is funding. Why would they be funding failing newspapers? It's cheaper than other ways of buying people's minds. So she goes and talks about just how wonderful it is and how wonderful their paper is. Makes me want to puke. And just to give you an idea, the grateful for varied opinions letter, I'll give you the rest of the page just to give you some insight into this. This was in the Saturday paper beginning of February. And you've got fishing shacks send a message. We had a big storm here in Maine, big high tide, excessively high tide. And there were these fishing shacks in South Portland that were right on the ocean, and they got swept away. And so this is the climate change climate crisis letter. And what they don't tell you is that there were 5 fishing shacks, and 2 of them were swept away 50 years ago from that same spot. So, 50 years ago, now it happened again. It's a storm. It's not global warming. It's not rising oceans. It's a storm, an unusual storm, a 50-year storm. But, they don't talk about that. It's climate change, even though the data doesn't support rising tides and so forth. So then you have the "We need a ban on assault weapons" letter. And the effective gun safety law starts with a phone call, which is, call your legislator and get gun control put in place. In other words, take the guns. And then the hypocrisy on display at Senate hearing, and this is another one. U.S. senators, the gross hypocrisy of U.S. senators when it comes to gun violence, the leading cause of death of children and teens in the United States. So there's basically 3 weapons, gun control, and then there's an larger opinion piece. We must shift thinking from thing oriented to person oriented. And capitalism is an efficient and effective economic system, but today the system is out of balance and does not adequately serve social needs. In other words, we should shift to socialism. And so that's basically the editorial page, and highlighted by a letter stating how wonderful the Suppress Herald is. So that's, over a couple of weeks, we've got a lot of self patting on the back about how wonderful the Suppress Herald is. And just kind of crazy. But that's our local news. And to remind you, it's not local, it's run by people from away, billionaires from away. And, you've got a situation where I said there's a global warming article, letter to the editor. And if you go through the paper, and this is, again, I've got a couple of weeks here just reviewing. I've been off a little bit, and just to line them up, you've got the global warming stack, which is, opinion pieces. Here's storm damage underscores need for collaborative state response, and it's all about global warming. And then you've got Drown Road proposal endangers people and the environment. Global warming is in there. Then we've got this is a whole article about the winter storm. I'll just hit some highlights here. And this is the real problem with the whole global warming thing. Is we've got a few things that keep getting cited, and those are things that have been completely debunked. The data, the facts on the ground don't support these typical global warming, proof that it's happening. Extreme weather made more frequent and ferocious by climate change has walloped Maine in the last year. Except the data and the statistics do not support that weather is more extreme or ferocious or more frequent. Hurricanes, they keep saying hurricanes are getting stronger and more frequent, but the data, the statistics, the reality does not support that. But they keep citing that, and they keep citing that, and they keep citing that. And people have been told so many times that's the definition of propaganda. Say it enough times, and everybody will believe it. Over the last century, Maine sea levels have been rising at a rate of about a half foot a century. There's no data for that either. That's actually not necessarily a fact. Tides change because the distance of the moon to the earth changes, and other factors, and even the temperature of the ocean as it warms up is going to become bigger. And yeah, that's global warming, but that's also, we're talking about El Nino now, and we're talking about other factors. And so, as I mentioned, the shacks are a perfect example that we had a storm just like the one we just had here 50 years ago. Maine sea levels are projected to rise between 1.1 and 3.2 feet by 2050, and 3 and 9.3 feet by 2100. 1.1 and 3.2 feet, or, and 3 to 9.3 feet. Well, whose model is that? What that really tells you is they don't have a clue. We could have a mini ice age by 2100, and we could end up with sea levels dropping. I'm not saying we don't do things to make our coastlines resilient. We don't build better buildings. All of these things are common sense, because the climate, yes, the earth is changing. It always has, and it always will. And so building better buildings, resilience, those things are very valid. But the idea that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels and all the rest is just not in good sense in the grand scheme of things. So this just goes on and names these, you've got a model that can't discern between 3 feet and 9.3 feet, and the models are all been debunked over time anyway. In other words, they can't even model the energy use of a small building, much less the entire earth. Because of climate change, Maine's winters are becoming warmer and shorter, and the state continues to warm faster than the global average, according to the state climate change plan. According to the state climate change plan. A bunch of wackadoodles that are all running around screaming fire. So, this just goes on. That's another climate change section. And this is just over a couple of weeks. Underfunding state government impairs Maine's climate response. There you go. Money, money, money. Follow the money. Underfunding the state. Here's another one. Climate experts. Maine must prepare for more frequent floods, even though the statistics don't support that. Scientists talks about climate change and the blue acceleration in Maine. Let's make everybody crazy, and let's cause all sorts of anxiety in our children, scare the hell out of them, and it's just unnecessary, and it's really unfortunate. We need some climate reality, and we need to have the other side heard. I've talked about it on this podcast once or twice. There's a CO2 coalition. There are other organizations, thousands of scientists coming out. And this is one of the things that you're seeing, and what I'm seeing is that this comes in like bursts, where the climate articles, and I'm wondering, where do these things come from? It's, here's a Bloomberg opinion editor and columnist covering climate change. So, Bloomberg. I wonder if Bloomberg, the billionaire, trades in carbon credits. I bet he does. Follow the money. We're going to talk a lot more in upcoming podcasts about the whole climate change hoax, because it is. And we're going to talk about what the real goal is here. And I believe there's a big part of it is the $1 trillion. That's what they talk about. It's not me. It's written right out there. And they've declared that that carbon trading, carbon credits, so everybody can feel good about using gas cars or flying their jets and they can buy a carbon offset, is $1 trillion business. Well, if it's $1 trillion business, the brokers that are running the business, their skim is hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions for their 10% skim off of carbon credit trading. And we'll talk more details because it is a huge scam. Perhaps the biggest funneling of money to the elite class in history by far. And they have to keep up the climate scare in order to drive it. And we're going to pay for it through the nose because if they're skimming off hundreds of billions of dollars and it's costing the economy trillions of dollars to pay for these, you know, one step above a pet rock, it's going to be the cost of everything. Carbon taxes, carbon credits, carbon scam. And this is one of the best ones this week. The 2024 election just might turn on ... climate change. Voters may be starting to realize climate change has a growing impact on the economy, public health, immigration, and more. Oh yeah, now they're blaming. This is the most specious thing of ever. Immigration is all about climate change. They're fleeing from drought and all the rest. No, they're being paid. They're bought. Their tickets. Their plane tickets are being bought by the United Nations and by NGOs, non-government organizations funded by your American tax dollars. They're given gift cards, debit cards loaded so they can make the trip to the southern border and walk across the Mexican border and then be bussed and flown with plane tickets paid for by your tax dollars to cities where your tax dollars are paying to house them, feed them, clothe them, and then crime and all the rest of it. And it's all because of climate change. Really? We need to wake up to the reality. And the propaganda is happening everywhere we turn and everywhere in the news, they call it. And this is, I think, in the main Sunday Telegram just this week. Tired of fumes, parents seek electric school buses. And, here's one of the biggest things, okay? Diesel spews fumes, and there are fine particulates in diesel exhaust. There are fine particulates in jet exhaust. There are fine particulates in any exhaust from cars, trucks, and so forth. Diesel is especially, a problem with that. And breathing those fine particulates is not healthy. Okay, that's a given. But they're talking about the fumes in school buses, and so they're going to electric buses. Which, if you don't mind your kids being stuck somewhere because the bus ran out of power, out of electricity, out of charge, and so forth, they don't talk about those things. But electric bus companies, massively funded by government grants, are going broke because they don't work that well. And logistics is not that great yet. There may be a time when batteries work and get us further and so forth, but they're trying to jam these things down us. But they're talking about tired of fumes, and then they go to knowing all of the stressors and anxiety from climate change and the fact that this is a huge burden for our children, Hurtado said. That places a burden on us, right? I don't want to repeat that. Knowing all the stresses and anxiety from climate change for our children. Yeah, they have scared the crap out of them. There's no wonder. kids are being loaded up with all sorts of drugs to deal with anxiety and all the rest, and getting AD crap out of them and lie. And it's just unbelievable to me that we keep doing this without having a other side of it and basically having an adult conversation about it. But follow the money. The people that own now all of the media, and social media is included in that, online content, driving the narrative, all have a motivation because they're the people over here collecting billions of dollars through their other schemes. And climate change, they have to scare us to push us so that we'll go along with carbon trading, carbon credits, lining their pockets with billions and billions of dollars of skimmed money. That's what it is. Control, and let us pay the price. And then here's another one. Again, this is just Sunday. We had the Tired of Fumes article, and kids are all anxiety over climate change. And then the letter to the editor, take action now on climate change. So accelerate transition to zero emission vehicles. It's just, you look at this is the latest. And so you got climate change, Biden or Trump. The choice this fall is clear. Just take a guess which choice is written up and in the article, letter to the editor. It's bashing Trump, saying Biden's the better one. Even the cartoons, okay? And I don't do that as part of my grade for the liberal versus conservative versus neutral that I talk about, that I've done for 2 years now. I don't talk about or include the cartoons, but you've got a, cartoon mocking Trump, a guy saying, old guy sitting in a chair looking at the TV with Trump, I miss George H.W. Bush. And then you've got Putin and Trump, and there's Putin. And I thought Tucker Carlson was a stooge. So another one against Trump. And then you've got Republicans, an elephant, and mocking the Republicans. So 4 out of 5 cartoons on the editorial page are also liberal. And then once in a while, something creeps in that does give us some real insight, and somebody actually does some reporting. This is the one that I could find in the entire couple of weeks looking at these papers and looking at articles that are all focused on climate change. This is one that's warm winter, low precipitation prompts warnings about thin ice. And this is very important in Maine. And this has been happening for a very long time. In my youth, I lived on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. And I used to go diving underneath the ice and pulling cars and snowmobiles off or out of the water, out of the lake that had fallen through the ice. So thin ice is nothing new. Warm winters are nothing new. I can tell you this was in the 80s. So we're talking about 40, 45 years ago. There was warm winters and thin ice. And it happens. And there are cycles, and this is an article that actually addresses it. Jameson said the weather has been influenced by El Nino, a climate pattern that occurs every few years in the Pacific Ocean. It is characterized by a warming of the ocean surface, which can have significant effects on weather patterns, namely milder temperatures in some regions around the world. Temperatures have been above normal, so we've seen a lot more thawing degrees than we have the freezing degrees by this time of year, she said. I can certainly attribute this year in part to the effects of El Nino and other global patterns. In other words, it's not climate change, global warming. El Nino happens, and it's been happening for millennia, and it will continue to happen. And so we'll have some warm, wet winters or warm winters with less snow, and that's always been happening. They keep saying it's more frequent, but the models don't really bear that out. And warming happens, but more than likely, the reality is it's from the sun. The sun's rays are what does 100% of our energy came from the sun. It may have been thousands, million years ago. Trees, the sun turned trees into wood. That died, fell down, pressed into the earth, compressed over all those years, turned into oil and gas. The energy came from the sun. So there's a cycle with carbon, just like there's a cycle of life. And they just don't want anybody to talk about the reality and stop scaring children. So that's our climate change run. The couple other things, we've had in the news lately, the Senate passed a border bill. It was actually a funding bill, mostly for Ukraine, some for Israel, some for Taiwan, and a pittance for the border. And now they're out there saying that Biden tried to pass, this is a Biden's border bill. He's dealing with immigration. That was the biggest load of crap I've heard in a very long time. That bill is crap. They're not going to stop immigration. You can pass, they're not enforcing the laws we have now. So why would passing another law, if they're just going to ignore it again, change anything? We get it. The people get it. But the propagandists are going to do their best. It's election year, by the way. So they've got to portray this as, Biden is trying to do something and the Republicans are in the way. Senate border bill would speed work permits for asylum seekers. Oh, that's great. So now we can tell all these illegal immigrants, and that's what they are. They came across the border without proper paperwork, without applying, without doing normal immigration. They streamed into our country across the border knowing that they wouldn't be stopped and that they'd be handed a piece of paper and told to show up in 5 years, which they never will. And when they do show up, a vast majority, I've heard anywhere from 80 to 90+% of asylum seekers, once they do get adjudicated in a court of law, are rejected. In other words, they did not meet the criteria for asylum, which means you're fleeing persecution in your country. They're just here because housing, food, clothing, debit cards now. They're talking about they're handing $10,000 debit cards to illegal immigrants in New York. And they're on the system. And so the Senate border bill would speed work permits for asylum seekers. So we want a magnet. Now you can come. You don't have to wait is what they're after. And it's not going to pass. At least we hope not. And so now we're just basically turning up the magnetic power of free stuff. And instantly you can come and take somebody's job. And let me tell you, everybody talks about a living wage. What do you think's happening with all of these illegal immigrants coming to this country by the millions. And what do you think is happening to those good paying jobs in construction, in the trades? I've heard plenty of stories of owners of roofing companies that were paying a very good wage, 20, 25, $30 an hour to roofers to do work. And then down the street, they hire illegal immigrants, or they hire immigrants for $8 an hour. And what do you think happens to the guy's roofing company that's trying to pay a living wage? And these are the same people that are advocating for all of this immigration, are saying that we need to pay living wage and we have to have people be able to, work and not have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Well, wake up. This is the propaganda that is being pushed upon us by the media. And, just the headlines and the way they print it. Republicans attack spending on asylum seekers in Maine. Attack. Yeah, Republicans attack. Democrats, they address issues. Republicans attack, or they're mean. Republicans are questioning spending all this money on asylum seekers when we have homeless people that are been living here. We have veterans that are in the streets, and we're housing illegal immigrants and leaving other people out in the street. If that's an attack, bring it on. That's reality. What else we got in this deck? So this is really good. In the world section of the paper, the Maine Sunday Telegram, the Suppress Herald. Angola-U.S. ties seen as model for African relations. An American-funded railway project heralds a major realignment for the oil-rich nation. This is a piece written, and in the piece, there's Joe Biden shaking hands with the president of Angola. And this is basically a build piece for how great Biden is on building relations around the world. when you've got, wars breaking out everywhere because of weakness. You've got this guy who's disaster, the Afghanistan withdrawal. His international record is abysmal. And all they can find is they built a railroad in Angola, and he's got a picture with him. That's pretty pitiful when that's all you've got to try and build this guy up in an election year. But that's what they're doing. I mean, where did this come from? There's things going on, and we've got to write an article about Biden shaking hands with Angola and the model for Africa. The reality is China is taking over Africa, and they're capturing all of their resources, natural resources, and basically extending their influence everywhere. And we sit there and we built a railroad in Angola. Wonderful. A few other things, once in a while, again, this stuff creeps through, but there's a major move to build up the economy and say the economy, how wonderful the economy is, and everything's great, and inflation's down, and the stock market's up. Why do you think the stock market's up? Maybe because we printed a couple $1 trillion. All this COVID relief money floating around. A lot of it was stolen. A lot of it was illegally done through the employer, payroll protection plan, the ERTC, employment retention tax credits. Now we're finding out that billions of dollars was ripped off, some of it by foreigners that illegally and falsely filed and got those funds. Now they're trying to claw them back. Well, all that money is just floating around out there, but it's not level. You have those that were able to steal it, a lot of them connected, a lot of them with friends in Washington, or they are in Washington. And so you got a couple $1 trillion floating around out there, but it's not through an economy. It's just through government. And I wouldn't even call it spending, printing. And that's what's propping everything up. But it's not underlying, it's not a really strong situation, in my humble opinion. And once in a while, things creep through. And what I've got here is the business section of the Suppress Herald. Many Americans becoming saddled with credit card debt. They're not becoming saddled with it. They had to spend money to pay the grocery bill. They went to the store and their paycheck didn't make it to buy groceries. This is going to be a big thing. You've got credit card debt. Now Biden is out after the Supreme Court sided against him that he could not provide relief to student loan debt. And he's doing it anyway after the Supreme Court said you can't. Now he's out canceling student debt. Well, who's going to pay for that? They borrowed money from the federal government indirectly through the student loan program. Well, if they aren't going to pay back the money, what happens? All that money is not, it's just written off, call it. So now we're going to have to make that up. It's unbelievable that they think that, they write this stuff up like it's a great thing. Here's the insight section in that's the opinion section of the Suppress Herald. This is the whole front page. What kind of person would let kids go hungry? Some Republican governors would, just to spite Biden. That's the story. Right. Basically, there's a summer program for school lunch programs that goes when school's not in session. And they're trying to force that on states, but it's not fully funded. So the states have to pick up the tab. And so some governors are saying, we can't do that. We have budget problems. We have real issues. Taxes are going up quicker than we can, handle. The free money's running out. All the COVID relief money and all the rest that's been flooded into states, local governments, school budgets. It's all running out. And now it's all going to, things are not looking good on the budget cycle if you pay attention to your local news. Here's another article, and this is really important. Classified documents report evokes 2016 race. This is the Biden documents case where the Justice Department investigated him having all of those stolen, classified documents and then having them in unsecure places all over the place. And the prosecutor came out and said, oh, he's too old to go on trial. He'd be a doddering old fool on trial. And so we probably couldn't convict him because they'd feel sorry for him, which is a load of crap. But that's basically how they're painting it. And now the Suppress Herald and others, the media has to jump in. This is an Associated Press piece. There's also a lot of Washington Post pieces in the Suppress Herald. But, the Justice Department cleared Democrat Biden too criminal wrongdoing, but painted a politically damaging picture of his handling of classified information. They didn't clear him. They didn't say he didn't break the law, which he did, by taking as a senator and then as a vice president who did not have presidential powers that Trump had to declassify documents and to take documents with the Presidential Records Act. He had none of those things that Trump had. Trump gets Mar-a-Lago raided and he's facing the rest of his life in jail. Biden gets a pass, and they're trying to say, and now that it's the propaganda time to kick in and make this go away. Oh, they're not the same. No, they're not the same. Trump had full ability to declassify anything. And he had the Presidential Records Act, which means he can take anything that's his property until the courts or somebody else says otherwise. Arresting him for doing what he did, filing charges and trying to put him in jail for that. We'll see how that goes. I don't think it's going to end up by the time it's done. You might get a judge and a jury in Washington, D.C. to convict him because there is no justice in Washington, D.C. with the judges and juries there. But by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, there isn't a chance, I don't think, that Trump will be convicted of anything because of the Presidential Records Act and because of his ability to declassify documents. But here you have, this is a piece to basically say the Justice Department cleared Democrat Biden. They did not clear him. They stated that he did break the law, but we're not going to prosecute him, just like Hillary Clinton destroyed subpoenaed emails and phones. Destroyed them, took hammers to them, destroyed the phones. Bleach bitted, which is a program to clean hard drives of any information so that you cannot recover it. That was subpoenaed documents, emails, and those phones were subpoenaed. She destroyed that. That's illegal. She also had a private server as a public employee, as the Secretary of State. That also is illegal. She broke the law. They chose not to prosecute. But now they're trying to paint it as they cleared him. They didn't clear him. That report did not clear Biden of wrongdoing. He did wrongdoing. But now the newspapers, if you can call it that, the Suppress Herald and across the country, the media are trying to cover it all up. And then I think this is one of the best ones of all. Biden's memory is failing. So is Trump's. But what about all the other stuff? It, yeah, he's old too. You can't even compare the two. It's not about age. It's about their mental acuity. It's about their ability to lead. Trump's a leader. Biden is a doddering old fool. Period. But you've got a whole article in the Suppress Herald. Again, it's the insight section, the main page of this Sunday paper. Biden's memory is failing, and so is Trump's. And they have some examples that are specious of Trump. Couldn't remember this or that. Trump is always playing games when he's talking and when he's doing things. So that's pretty much what I've got for the podcast today. I will say that this goes the Suppress Herald when the main trust for local news bought all the papers. They bought all the papers in Maine, virtually all of them. And even local, the little local freebie once a week that comes out, you pick it up in the grocery store on your way out. And, once a week, even there, the Suppress Herald is starting to put letters to the editor and all. And so, just the local paper that's just in my town. Trump supporters should separate facts from fiction. So there's a Trump bash. Student urges legislators to support rent relief. Rent relief, in other words. Let's subsidize housing instead of stopping with the all the rules and regulations that prevent people from building affordable housing. And here's the same. This is same local paper. Trump supporters think, listen, look. And Bellows followed law on Trump decision. That's the Secretary of State in Maine who took it upon herself to remove Trump from the ballot for the primary, which we're going to find out she had no right to do, and she should be removed from office. But you know, the Suppress Herald is doing their best to support her. So that's the latest in the Suppress Herald news across Maine, and it's happening across the country. You should be aware of that. And don't forget, politics is local, and so is propaganda. And so we have to be aware of it. And we'll keep bringing this podcast out and let you know what's happening.